And it's being recorded. Thanks for that reminder. Yes, this is being recorded because there's many folks who couldn't be on the call today. And folks are beeping in, so as folks are beeping in, I'm just going to provide a quick welcome and quick overview of our time together. Again, this event, today's call, is intended to sort of kick off this initiative, which is intended to be a pipeline for connecting our most aspirational and talented emerging leaders with our alumni who have made it in some ways, right? Who have occupied significant positions. It's our way of really creating this, creating an intentional community around advancement for folks to advance into more influential positions in the public and social sector. And so many thanks to the Annie Casey Foundation for their support in helping us experiment with this. And thank you for your support, alumni, not just the Next Waivers and the champions, but thank you guys for making the road with us in terms of experimenting to build this out. No doubt that the next iterations of this call and events like this will be standing on your shoulders, so thanks so much. That being said, again, I'm MacArthur, Antigua, and I'm here with my colleague, co-presenter, Caroline McAndrews, who is calling in from New York City. Caroline, hello.
Hello there. Very
awesome.
Excited to speak with everyone today.
Yes, and we've got lots of folks calling in, and they're beeping in. And again, if you're calling in, you're going to be on mute. And thanks again to Caitlin Endyke, who will be our producer today. She's on the ones and the twos, handling the production side of it. She's handling the chat box. And so, as she said, if you got any questions, feel free to pump them in the chat box. If it's technical stuff, we'll try to solve them. Or if you also got questions about content, we're going to have some points of interaction in terms of polls and responding to questions. We invite you to use the chat box there to do that as well. Great. So before we begin, I guess I think we've got the majority of folks on. So let's begin the call. So welcome. I want to start, today what we want to do is we've invited the Building Movement Project because we want to explore their report, Vision for Change, because I think it's incredibly relevant to the work of this pipeline project, which is trying to advance, our most talented alums into more influential positions by creating a community around it. So today we're going to review some of the highlights for that Vision for Change report. We're also going to hear from two of our alum. So we will be hearing from two of our alum, one of our Next Waivers, one of our champions. They're going to share sort of where they're at, as well as they're going to provide some brief sort of reflection on what they think of this report or how relevant it is for them. And then we also want to set the table for what our work is collectively in this community for the next 6 months. That's sort of the window for this first iteration of the pipeline. And so that's what we're going to do on this call in just 1 hour. So the first thing I want to get started with is a long time ago, well, not a long time ago, probably on the turn of the year, probably 3 months ago, we sent out a survey via SurveyMonkey to our alumni. And we first started with alumni that first completed our national survey for alumni back in 2010. So it was almost like 3 years ago. We invited alumni then to share with us their aspirations. And out of that, we had about 1,500 people respond to that at that time, alum. And so out of that 1,500 people, there were 270 alum that said they wanted to be a CEO someday, an executive director or CEO. So that was the first group we started with. We want to know, when we built out this pipeline, we wanted to revisit with them. We created this SurveyMonkey inviting them to check back with us. Where are you at with this process? Are you a CEO right now? Do you still want to be a CEO? And then after we invited that first 267 people, of course not everybody responded, we then started sort of virally sending that out to different constituencies in our alumni network. We sent it out via Facebook. We sent it out via Twitter. We also sent it out through local sites because, again, a lot of local sites have their own infrastructure for alumni engagement. And so when it's all said and done, by mid-February, we had heard back from 200 alumni. So that's a pretty good sample size. And so what I first want to start with is sharing with you guys what some of the highlights or some of the things we learned from that. And again, the intention of that survey was to get this pulse, if you will, of our alumni network in terms of where are their aspirations at? Are they still interested in this process and of advancing their career? And then moreover, hopefully, what can we learn from this? So in terms of setting up this pipeline project. So what we did learn is, out of the participants, out of the about 186 respondents to this question, we found out that 72.6% are still working in not-for-profit, 14.5% are in government, and 12.9% are in the private sector. So back when we did that first survey in 2010, we discovered that 80% of our alums work in the public or social sectors. That number still remains to be consistent, in fact, even more. That's one thing that we discovered. Out of that group, we asked them, do you still aspire to be a CEO? Do you still want to be a CEO? We found that 64 respondents, 31% of them, said yes, and I will do that in the next 1 to 3 years. And then we saw that 132 of them, which is the majority, a super majority, like 64.7, said, I'm unsure when that will happen. And then only 8 responses, 4% said no. So just sort of based on that, that we see that at least the alumni that responded to this survey, 200 alum that responded to this survey, there was a great desire or interest around wanting to still work in this sector, the public and social sectors, as well as still wanting to be, wanting to attain position. So want to pause there, and also want to notice. I see. Gosh, it's great to see all these folks calling in. Also, there seems to be a common question that hopefully you're checking the chat box to dial in to. And thanks, Caitlin, for continuing to remind people to call in that phone number to get the sound on this. Great. Want to share a couple more slides with you, just sort of what we learned on this survey. We also learned on this survey, we did hear from about 15 or so people that were identified themselves as executive directors or CEOs. And so we asked them, what were the two, give us two ways that you think public allies could best advance alumni, or what would best advance alumni to get these positions? So this is from the CEO position. And then 45% of them, or 45% said that networking with CEOs and EDs would be a great way to advance that. They also said skill building would also be a way to advance that. Mentoring. And then the next two sort of big sort of points for references and interview preparation and sharing job opportunities. So you see the big three again is sort of being in a company with other CEOs and executive directors who know that experience. They also recommended to keep skilling up, and then also finding mentoring relationships. So those were what EDs and CEOs thought that would best advance alumni to getting their positions. And then we also asked those that wanted to be in those positions, what do you think would accelerate your path? 25% said professional and skill development. 23% said further education and certification. 21% said networking with executive directors and CEOs. And then 16% said mentoring and coaching from executive directors and CEOs, more experience and more responsibility. So those were the other ones. So we see some alignment in terms of the, what our CEOs thought would advance people, and as well as what those that want to aspire to get into those positions, what they think they need. What we did, with that information is that, again, we try to use this sort of to think about how do we set up, set up this pipeline and set this up. And so, after reviewing this, we're about to go into this point of providing an overview about the pipeline project. This sort of setting the table. For, well, what did we create or what did we foster? And then we're going to bring in Caroline McAndrews to talk a little bit more about Vision for Change. Then we're going to hear about, again, our case examples. We're going to hear from our alums, 2 alums, to talk about sort of where they're at and sort of what makes this relevant for them. And then we're going to set ourselves up with some compelling questions and how does this community move forward? So that's what we're going to cover in the next 50 minutes. Those of you who are on Twitter, want to invite you to use the hashtag #PAAlumPipeline if you've got some comments to let others that aren't in this conversation know what's going on, or if you want to talk to each other sort of outside on Twitter, or feel free to use the handles Public Allies or Building Movement. Adrian Carver had a great question on there. What were the demographic info of the respondents? Right now we didn't ask specifically, at least on this survey, we didn't go into the depths of race or ethnicity. And we're still trying to unpack some more pieces of it. Things we learned were sort of like, what are the average years in your current job? We also tried to survey, we also found out things such as, your use of platforms like LinkedIn, are they useful? So Adrian, so just want to let you know, thanks for that question. But we didn't, in terms of this survey, we didn't use a demographic overlay in terms of that. Cool. So want to circle back in terms of, again, feel free to, I invite you to use on Twitter the Public Allies handle or the Building Movement handle, or using the hashtag PALM Pipeline, because we do, I do check out the Twitter. It's fun for me to check out later what you're getting out of this experience, as well as what you're moving forward. Great. So now that we've kind of gotten out of the way or sort of introduced to you sort of some of the tools we use in helping build this, which was that first survey, want to pass on to you, introduce to you my colleague on this call, Caroline McAndrews, who works over at the Building Movement Project, which is a project of Damos. And so Caroline, welcome aboard. I first met Caroline working through the, working on these issues of leadership in the sector. I thought that the work of Building Movement Project was incredibly relevant, namely about vision for change. Before we get into the product or the report they talked about, I'd like to welcome Caroline. Thanks for coming on. And could you just speak really briefly again about the intentionality of the Building Movement Project, as well as
Sure.
Yeah.
And thanks for asking me to be part of this. I'm pretty excited about the whole idea y'all are having around the alumni network and using it as kind of a leadership network for opportunity. So real quickly, the Building Movement Project, we work pretty exclusively with nonprofits, and we help them figure out ways that they can be partners in movement building or social change work. One of the ways that we do that, as Mac mentioned, is by looking at the leadership within organizations, is looking at how to build multi-generational workplaces and leadership at all levels. So I was really excited to, again, work with you guys on this to think about what are the ways that we can use networks outside of organizations in order to build leadership.
Great.
So thanks.
Great. It's a little bit of a walk in the talk, right? What I'm hearing you say is that you can't really do this work alone, right? Like no one entity can do leadership development on its own. So you're looking for those intersections and what is the possible infrastructures of this work. And so it's great to have you. And it sort of segues into sort of what brought this project around. It goes back to, one of the key drivers is the Annie Casey Foundation is our key funder. And one of their key questions that they're grappling with is how they look at the demographics of the sector, right, Caroline? And what they're seeing is that, the demographics of this country is changing, and the demographics of the not-for-profit sector, namely who's being served, are changing as well. However, the positional leadership within the public and social sector organizations don't seem to be moving at that same rate of change demographically. And so they're very motivated to figuring out how do we advance diverse leaders, new leaders with cultural competence into these positions. And that's sort of their hypothesis. I mean, I think they're an early, Caroline, check in with me. They're a bit of an early adopter in terms of this approach to leadership development. And, we can both talk about this because we're both funded through Annie Casey. So I think, again, this is sort of modeling what Annie Casey wants is its grantees actually working together on and sharing this. And do you have any comment on sort of that take?
I think you're absolutely right in terms of the early adopter side. And I think a lot of people are struggling with how we make our leadership look more like our sector in general. So this is one of the ways they do that.
Right on. And so, that's Annie Casey's deal. And then meanwhile, Public Allies. Public Allies has always wanted, through its alumni networks, always intended to, how do we accelerate our alumni skill, career networks, so you can achieve the impact that you're trying to do through your leadership practice, right? So if anything, it just looked like a sweet connection with Annie Casey. This is definitely in our sweet spot. We think that this is the sort of unique offering that Public Allies has, is our access for diverse leaders. We've got a track record in turning out diverse leaders. And so we just sort of thought, well, let's focus in on this, hone this more. And so we thought about what's our approach to this. One of the challenges of this is that we've got a huge network around the country. This network also spans a generation. There's some of us on the call that did Public Allies back in the 90s, like myself, and then we got some folks who just finished the program not too long ago, right? So you not only do you have distance, but you also have time. And so how do you create a space that's relevant through that? And it also leans on our values. And so I want to speak really quickly. The approach that we're taking on this is through intentional community. We're looking at what, in some ways you're sort of learning from your own experiences, right? We know we have this great apprenticeship program. Well, what about the apprenticeship can you port out to other audiences? And what we've learned is that one of the most powerful thing about the apprenticeship program is the intentional learning community. So how do we port that out to the alumni space? And so what we're trying to do is create a virtual space, Again, so it isn't necessarily geographically based, but it's virtual, meaning let's use a platform like LinkedIn that people can access and visit and find each other through that. And then once we're in that space, how do you facilitate relationships being built? Relationships on a one-on-one level, relationships with an organizational level. How do you set up activities that do this, and then also set up activities that are continuous learning, right? If you imagine these circles, there's your learning as an individual participant, but then there's Public Allies learning as the facilitator of this. That's why we're asking to do these surveys. That's why we're sort of like looking at everything we put out there. We're trying to use that data to drive how can we use this, how can we use our next steps to follow that and react to that well, so that way it's relevant and it's important for our participants. Ultimately, it's about agility and accessibility. When I talk about agility, it's agility meaning how do you not need to use bricks and mortar to do a program, if that makes sense, right? Because we need to lean on technologies. We need to lean on sort of the way, lean on opportunities as they come up. And so you'll see in this process of the pipeline project, you're going to see a lot of opportunities come quickly, or a lot of opportunities on be foreshadowed weeks to go. But I think it's really dependent on your ability to be agile. And then the last step is accessibility.
Because I was going to the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Ooh, I got some sound on here. We got some.
And I saw John.
All right, great, thanks. Accessibility is the next piece. And what I mean by accessibility is recognizing that you all are doing the work. Some of our champions are running incredible organizations or responsible for large bodies of work. Our next waivers are also influential and working working in their own ways and doing this work. So how do you set it up so that you might have few events like this that invite the whole community to physically come together, but how do you set up a variety of modes that people can interact with this work? Personal individual reflection, one-on-one, small group conversations, resource layouts, or even just referrals to other great trainings. How do we set up a menu of options so that the individual participant can craft out the best menu for themselves and again use this platform to accelerate forward? So that's what this pipeline project is about. And again, to be very transparent, some of you might be thinking, okay, what's the syllabus or what's the thing? And on some level, we're trying to find that sweet tension behind, okay, this is the path we're trying to go in the next 6 months, and here's our goals. But we're also trying to be careful not to schedule a lot of things that everybody has to be at, knowing that everybody kind of has a different route on how they want to get there. And our hope is that, again, through this first iteration of this, we're going to learn sort of what connects or what works best, and then for the next iteration we'll do it. But I just want to be clear, in some ways there's no one right way to do the pipeline project, except if, again, going to the next step, we do have a goal, because Casey just doesn't give you money for being who you are. There's tangible things we're trying to create. We are hoping by August 2013 that 75% of our participants can report that they've increased their social capital. What we define social capital is, what's the breadth and depth of your professional networks? Have you increased that through these exercises, through these virtual activities? Through this stuff. And then we do want to move alumni into positions of increased influence. So that's why we're asking our champions to share with us jobs that they see coming across the pike. That's why we're being more intentional about populating that. We want our alumni to actually move ahead, whatever that means to them, but we want them to report that there's positions of increased influence. So at least for this pilot by August 2013, I want to share with you that's the intentionality behind this, that you as a participant are going to deepen your professional connections. And also move on. Megan asked this great question. By increased influence, you mean basic management or only ED/CEO roles? The way we've defined it is that you're moving to a position that has more influence than the current one you have. So for some of you, that might be the executive director position. For some of you, that might be the quote-unquote next step up. For some of you, it might be keeping the same title, but you might have an increased role, perhaps, maybe, or might have an increased constituency or some other innovation at your work that you're going to be overseeing. Because one thing we want to sort of explore, thanks Megan for that question, I think on one hand, right, there's this notion of, well, we recognize on some level that we do need to have culturally competent, diverse leaders in positional authority so that they can pull the lever. But I do think our roots are about you practice leadership from wherever you're at, right? Everyone does lead. And so there's this tension we'll be exploring. And what we're actually going to, my hypothesis is that you can take on leadership from wherever you're at. Whether or not you have the position you know, and the role with that, you know, I do believe that follows you once you sort of establish that brand for yourself. But that's the hypothesis I'm exploring for this. So Megan, I hope that answers your question, that in terms of increased influence, you either move, you know, so that could be moving in your own org, or that could be doing something, you know, or it could be, you know, staying in your own same position, but you've, you know, sort of expanded your scope of the work that you're doing. So that's want to, again, provide this grounding, and the two populations we're sort of dividing our time, or sort of focusing on again are, we've identified these alumni champions. These are folks that are nominated by local sites, or folks that we've identified as the national office as folks who are doing a compelling leadership practice and in really influential positions in public and social sectors, or they know that deal. In some ways, I look at them as like, this is like the cool older cousin that knows stuff. You know, like how do we find those people? How do we tap those people in? And then our next waivers, you all were either nominated by your local sites because your local site said this person's a comer, this person's got it, that X factor, they have this aspiration, and then some of you self-selected. Some of you heard this invitation, and then you went through the process of jumping through hoops to be in this room, this virtual room, to do it. And so that's what we're starting with. Our numbers are around 21 champions, and we have about 130 next waivers. And so when you look at the large group of 4,400, this is the intentional community that has identified itself as wanting to take this challenge on. So this is what this is about. And so this takes us to our first poll question. And so I'm inviting you on the call to check on, and Caroline, check in with me. They just got to click, right? On the,
I do believe that, yep. So go ahead and start clicking your responses.
So have you reached out to anyone in this cohort, did you do it through LinkedIn? Did you do it through email? Or maybe you did a phone call? We sort of opened up the room, if you will, the LinkedIn room. We set it open up almost a month ago, and so you've had some time. Some of you even checked in. We had 70 responses to our, what are you in this for? So I want to invite you to check in right now as a point. It's sort of like this is a pretest in some ways. How have you embraced this so far? And so thanks. We got about do another minute for folks to click and vote. Great. And before I do this, Caroline, did you have any quick reflections to what I just said in terms of what you're seeing sort of in other parallel things real quick?
Yeah, I'll get into this in a little bit, but I think you guys are all starting from a great spot because, as we'll see, and anyone who got to look at the report, is using networks and figuring out how to use those links to not just get where you need to go, but also to learn. Is a great, people are looking for that. So I think it's just a great setup from where to start.
Awesome. So let's skip to these results, shall we? Let's see. Let's look at the big board. We had, out of the 31 that responded to this, wow, almost half have already reached out to other people on LinkedIn. A third said, I haven't done it yet. I didn't know I was being tested today. What's up with that? Nobody told me there was a quiz. And then we still had about 20% of us haven't thought about it, haven't thought about it yet. So great. It's great to sort of see, again, this is, I think it's a great check-in to see where as a network. I definitely encourage us to up those in terms of reaching out to each other and doing this. Let's move on to talking, in this middle segment, I want to talk about this Vision for Change report and have Caroline share with us sort of her findings. Caroline, again, we could say it's serendipity because it's sort of like when we started launching this, I came across this report. Maybe you say the universe opened it up. Or we could also be fair and say, this is how urgent this issue is right now, that there are folks that are working on this like yourselves. Can you speak more about the urgency about this topic before we get into this, sort of the findings of the report?
Absolutely. I think everyone is familiar now with, talk of innovation, of scale, of going to scale, of coming up with the next idea of how we're going to actually create real change in the country. And what we were interested in looking at was, what do leaders who have come into positions that other executive directors have left? So we're really looking at folks who have, I know there's a little bit of an issue with sound, so I am trying, let us know if I'm not coming through clearly. But basically, we wanted to know, are there special supports or skills that younger leaders taking over for previous EDs need to have? And we particularly looked at it from this angle and why the report is called Vision for Change, of where they wanted to get to. So just a little bit of background on it. If you haven't had a chance to read the report, do not worry. It will not affect your understanding on the call, but definitely take a chance to read it in the future if you do have that time. But we're mainly talking to social justice organizations. So when I talk about scale and when I talk about impact, these are folks who are mainly in organizing groups, although not all. And they were looking really to increase the amount of change they were seeing, not only in their organizations, but building out with other organizations to state and regional and national levels. So some of the similarities that we found that we'll talk about on this call is what a struggle it was to do that, while also figuring out how to manage these organizations. Many of them inherited organizations, so inherited staff, inherited culture, inherited ways of doing things, and how you really make the changes you need with limited funding and existing resources. So that was some of the things we found. One of the big challenges was this idea of transformational leadership. In other words, leading in a way that will create this change and inspire people to reach new heights, reach new impact, versus the actual day-to-day management.
So you conducted these conversations, try to glean from this, and you've sort of emerged three areas of sort of leadership, aspects of leadership that are really relevant to folks in positions like this. Can you speak to what these areas are? Yeah,
and I did want to point out, a lot of this is stuff you've heard before, right? Learning hard skills and soft skills in order to become a leader. But what emerged for us was a pretty interesting pie, if you will, and anyone who was able to take the reflection tool beforehand, you'll understand these three areas. This is how that reflection tool is broken down. You'll see leadership, management, and balance. And mainly the reason that it's important to look at all three of these things is that, everyone wanted to, again, maximize their ability to build impact and scale, right? And I mentioned that before. And this is what they were aiming to do by knowing both of these kind of what we often call hard and soft skills. So even though traditionally we've heard about them in this way, it's more than that. And that's what I want to look at in terms of this model, is that this is about building sustainable and deep leadership. So Mac talked at the beginning of the call about the way that Annie Casey approaches this, and I think similarly to us, that we're looking at how do you build not an individual's leadership alone, but the bench behind them and with them, and also the kind of the network that they're with, right? So how are we building leaders as a unit with that support instead of just individual leaders? Another way that it's more than just typical hard and soft skills is that to identify training and support in these different areas is key. So one of the things we heard from the folks we talked to was that there's a real difference between going to a program and learning organizing or learning vision setting. And Megan Roddy had a difference between a question about transformational leadership versus a typical definition of leadership. And I think this is one of the examples, is that when folks go to a place like, for example, Rockwood or an organizing training, they're learning about building leadership in a way that creates change, right? So you're not just organizing around an issue politically. You are organizing folks in order to develop them as leaders, in order that they can then impact their communities. And that's an example of transformational leadership, and a lot of the training that the folks we spoke to had found. On the other side, though, you have issues of HR, issues of promotion, issues of what goes on in the office every day amongst your staff that you are trying to manage, right? So on the one hand, you're holding this vision for change, and on the other hand, you have folks that are working for you that you're also trying to address their individual issues. So the big piece, I would say, in terms of thinking of leadership in these three ways is that it is a roadmap, right? There's pieces that you can build up now, even if you are not in a position of leadership right now.
And again, I want to refer, we talked about this tool, and many of you on the call, we invited you to do this Survey Monkey, which is actually was what Caroline's talking about. We asked you to self-identify where you at in these different aspects of leadership. So that's the tool they're talking about. And again, and what we're going to do with that tool is actually send you back your results along with a worksheet for you to continue sort of mapping out, building this map so that you can use it over the next point. And that's what I'm hearing you say, is that there's this real tension and challenge, because people want to make an impact in the issue, but they also got to build the bench, and they got to keep the lights on, right? and then you got to balance all this together, right? So that's the modern executive director or CEO position. That's what you're learning, or that's what you're sort of seeing. And that sounds a lot to do by yourself. How do you do that by yourself? Can you do it by yourself?
You cannot, no.
No. Tell me about that.
So one of the, obviously we've talked a lot on this call so far about networks, and folks have heard a lot about networking in general, right? How you create contacts to get jobs, how you create contacts to reach out for resources. One thing that we saw in this report and in these interviews that really spoke to us, that's not entirely surprised us, was that people really needed formal peer networks that were built around skills. And when I say that, what I mean is that there were folks who had identified each other, and they knew that their purpose was to come together to share challenges, to share questions, to give each other feedback, and they knew that that's what they were there for. It doesn't mean that these folks weren't friends also, or colleagues, but it was important to name the network and formalize it in order to provide that support. And this was separate from a mentor or a coach, right? So those were also important roles, but people really identified these networks as key to building out their reach. Another key part of this is moving beyond your organization, right? So a lot of the leadership we learn about happens within organizations. And Building Movement Project itself is focused on that very much, and creating structures in which people can be leaders at all levels. But really, again, key to building perspective, to building an outside voice on your own work and leadership are these networks outside of your organization.
Wow. So I just heard this profound thing that we need to have networks. However, many of us are in networks that aren't formalized, right? And if we actually choose to formalize this network, naming it and actually giving it sort of status, it actually becomes more useful to us. Did I hear you correctly on that?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it was really, again, it's really cool to hear that being affirmed, because I'm like, well, that's a pipeline project, right? It's this formalized network of like-minded folks who are trying to, almost help each other climb up the mountain collectively or together. So it was really cool to see that happen there. One thing we want to, one more point we want to talk to you in this breakdown, again, is that, with Public Allies folks, leadership, this isn't in a vacuum. We operate in a world where there are structures, informal structures, formal structures of power that affords people privilege or affords groups privilege, right? Because if it was all like neutral, it's not a meritocracy. And I think to me that's like the big elephant in the room, right? Or at least that's Can you speak to more about what is the role of race and gender, when it comes to attaining positional leadership or attaining influence, in this work and in this movement?
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons it's so important to always address this when we're talking about leadership is because it's not a meritocracy out there, right? And it's not a simple, if you do this or learn this, you will be the next leader, right? As Mac was saying, as you're saying, Mac, we exist within structures. One of the things that we did very intentionally with this report is we spoke to mainly leaders of color, which is generally where we focus our work. But we did not ask specifically about race and gender in the interviews that we did. So all of the things that came up were really things that we noticed, not inconsequentially, because we do look for it and that's what we are studying, but in a way that I really want to be specific about. So as these issues come up, there are certain things that happen for young people of color, young leaders of color, particularly young women of color, is where we saw it happening. And one is around gaining legitimacy. And so this is an additional challenge where we saw it in a couple of ways. One being, most, I think, obviously, except not maybe statistically because we only interviewed 17 people, but it was around funding. And specifically in two ways. So one being the requirements that leaders of color felt that they had to provide or the hoops they had to jump through in order to get funding were much more extreme. It was described as hard, whereas folks who we talked to who were not of color seemed to have no problem with it. And the second way it happened is around this idea of what you could either call innovation or mistakes. And the way we saw that was, and not to blanket white men in this way, but the two men that we spoke to in this interview were both describing their funders as encouraging them to make mistakes, encouraging them to learn. If something didn't go right, it's because they were ready to fail faster in a sense and get to the next level. Whereas young leaders of color mentioned that once they made a mistake, and they referred to it as a mistake, that it was the end of the funding. So in a sense, if you don't get it right the first time, there's a different kind of standard for you. There were also additional demands. And the reason this is important is because one of the areas we asked in the reflection tool, and one of the 3 aspects of leadership, was around balance. Can you balance your work and personal life? Can you balance time to think and vision as well as time to lead and manage? And the reason that was an additional challenge is because the need for diversity is recognized, right? Even though we operate within these structures, people are talking all the time about the need for diversity. What happens as a result of that is once a leader has been identified, right, a young leader of color, all of a sudden they need to be, everyone needs them on their board. Everyone needs them on their panel. Everyone needs them, to speak within different committees, right? And so that becomes a real tension that our interviewees spoke to, which is, do you not do that so that you have time to run your organization and lead, or do you do that because it's important to be in those spaces? So that was a real big struggle. And then finally, this issue around mentoring the next generation, right? So if there is such demand and you want to build new leadership, then the time and commitment it takes to really identify and mentor young leaders of color, especially young women of color, and given all of the demands that I've just talked about, was a real challenge and an additional one that came up.
Wow. Wow. So you outlined 3 major challenges. Sort of again, the report goes to some more of this, but some of the things you pulled out in this report is, one, that there are there are these sort of balancing hard and soft skills of being a leader. And then there's also the use of leveraging networks, and then ultimately race and gender issues. These are all dynamics that are at play in order for us for an individual to really have a leadership practice that is making impact in all these pieces, right? And that's unchecked, right? Like these are problems why things are the way they are, right? Like that we need to name these things. We need to start acting on these things. And so it seems like it's a great time now to ask the group, again, polling the group, in your leadership practice, which one of these issues do you find most resonates with you in terms of what you're challenged with, or in terms of, is that the right way to frame it, Caroline, as we're doing this poll? Right? Like
what have you grappled with? What are the issues that are coming up for you as you think about your own leadership, whether you are an ED CEO or whether you're a program associate? What are you dealing with as you think about this?
Awesome. Great. And we see folks chiming in, so it's great to see this. So we take another 30 to 60 seconds for the group to vote in and see which issue is most relevant for them so far. And thanks again. I want to acknowledge we're more than halfway through our presentation so far, and it's great to have such a great group, engaged group, and it's been great seeing your tweets out there as well. Thanks for those. I saw stuff from Tizzy and Todd Wellman, for example, getting active on Twitter, so it's great to see you out there doing it. Awesome. So let's skip to let's show the results of what our folks on the call had said. Again, it's to check all that apply, right? Is that correct, Caroline?
Exactly.
We did this one? Yeah. Right on. So, again, I didn't, even though there's one, networks seems to be one that folks are grappling with that has a little more attention. I still think all 3 are really relevant, right? Or at least it sort of bears out, at least for this group. There's some resonance there for that. So, and that's what I think what we hope to do. Definitely the leveraging networks piece in our time in the pipeline project, but we definitely want to, I think that's the one angle on the pipeline that we're really going to hit hard, if it will. I think that's what we're built to do. But I also hope that in this space, in this community, we're going to create opportunities for our participants to explore race and gender issues and how they impact their leadership practice, as well as finding maybe resources or finding, hearing from our champions down the road about how they balance hard and soft skills or how they've done that. And speaking of hearing from, we want to hear from, we've got folks on our call we want to hear from, and we wanted to take time to hear from a next waiver and a champion. And what's really cool about this is that they're both from the same site, except 6 years apart. So it's kind of neat to sort of have this, sort of seeing this this chain, if you will, of alumni. And so our first speaker is Damita Chambers. She's a graduate of Public Allies, North Carolina, 2006. And Damita's been really active not only when she was in North Carolina, but now she's located, I believe, in D.C. So I think you've been very active there as well. And so great to have you on the call. I want to talk to you for a few minutes. You there? Oh, man, really? Come on, Damita. Where are you at? Where are you at? I know you're there. I see you there. Maybe she's not on the call. Oh, man. No, come on, Caroline. That was a sweet lead-up, right? Oh, man. That was a sweet lead-up. Wasn't that a lead-up? Oh, man.
I think I
All right. Damita, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Oh, gosh.
I'm here.
That was a dramatic entrance, Damita. Were you like... That was like you parachuting in, like on a hang glider.
So hopefully I can actually stay on the call for the duration of my portion. I've been having some cell phone issues here.
All right. Let's not blame this on Sprint. All right, let's do this. So I want to know quickly, where are you at now? I know you're Assistant Director of Public Relations at Bowie State. But how long have you been there, and how does this fit in your journey overall?
Well, I just started at Bowie State University, which is in Bowie, Maryland, back in June of last year. And I kind of fell into working in higher education, having previously worked in nonprofit organizations for about 8 years, because in April of last year I actually was laid off from a job that I was in, or an organization I was in for about 6 years. So in terms of my journey overall in the nonprofit sector, I had spent a lot of time in my college years at Boston University working in nonprofit organizations and working through the nonprofit, the Volunteer Service Center at my school, and decided I was a journalism major and decided to go directly into journalism, working as a reporter for the Associated Press for about 3 years. Right after college, but then sort of had that pull and that desire to, again, work with social justice organizations. So decided to do the AmeriCorps program, first as an AmeriCorps Vista, working in North Carolina, in the Raleigh area with United Way. And then right after that did Public Allies, being able to work with an HIV/AIDS organization in the Raleigh area.
And then since then, you kind of bounced around like the nonprofit world for several years. Is that correct? Before coming into higher ed.
Absolutely. I was working most recently at a domestic violence and sexual assault organization, and again was working there for about 6 years.
Right. So So what makes you want to be an executive director or CEO or an advanced leader position? What inspires you to do that?
Well, I'm very passionate about social justice, the social justice movement, and very much want to be a part of leading that movement to a place where there are more people who are empowered to have a quality of life that they're looking for, and being able to have a voice in public policy discussions. So I think that, especially given some of the experience that I've had in working with Public Allies and some other organizations, I'm well positioned to do that. I just haven't had the kind of management experience, administrative experience to kind of get me to that next level.
And I guess that maybe you foreshadowed it, but what would you say the biggest challenge you face in getting to that goal?
Yeah, that's definitely it in terms of just lack of management experience in nonprofits in terms of like program management or managing staff, managing budgets, regulations, and things like that. So in previous positions, I didn't really see a really clear pathway for me within the organizations that I was in to be able to do that and gain those experiences.
And I guess to wrap up, this little mini interview before I want to bring in another speaker, but I want to keep you here, so don't go away unless Sprint wants to kick you away. Well, what do you think is the most helpful thing right now? Like you jump in with this intentional community, this pipeline project. What do you envision as the most helpful thing about being part of this intentional community?
I think the most helpful thing for me would be just the opportunity to network with mentors and other like-minded people who are moving through that path of leadership and being able to kind of see from other people's experiences how they did that, how they were able to gain the kind of experiences that I feel like I'm lacking, and how they were able to get into their positions and then even excel in their positions in management and executive director positions.
Damita, I am not Aladdin from the movie Aladdin, but I'm going to grant you that wish right now real quick because I want to bring on, you stick around because we're going to bring you back real quick, but I want to bring on board Bronwyn Lucas. Bronwyn, North Carolina alum 2000. She's currently the Executive Director of Youth Empowered Solutions, and she is one of our champions. And maybe if you haven't had a chance yet, she's also filled out one of the questionnaires. We've had all our champions fill out questionnaires about themselves and their leadership practice. And I want to invite Bronwyn on to talk a little bit what just Damita just said. Bronwyn, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, yes. Very good. Very good. Answer Damita's question real quick. Tell the story about how you got to this position.
Yeah, really interesting. I think I want to start just by saying I'm 39, so I'm relatively young for an executive director, and I was the co-founder and started as the founding executive director for Youth Empowered Solutions since 2008. So I started at age 34 as ED. I was an ally from the class of '98 in North Carolina, so I became executive director about a little bit more than 10 years after finishing my year of service for Public Allies. And prior to that, like Damita, I did Vista for 2 years. So I was part of the AmeriCorps network for 3 years. Through the work with AmeriCorps, I saw that I was really passionate for working with women and children. And after my year in Public Allies, went back to school for a master's degree in public health. And worked in the field for about 5 years and saw that a youth empowerment framework that my colleagues and I developed could really be applied to a whole variety of adolescent health issues. And so all the work we do is through this equity and social justice lens, but we wanted to start a 501c3 nonprofit that had a focus around youth empowerment as an equity issue. And so I came to this role as a program person who was really passionate. A lot of what was said earlier is really resonating with me about these hard and soft skills and these administrative systems that really take up a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like that was a surprise, huh? Like you're super passionate about this work. You got this killer model that's gonna this is it. This is awesome, and you get it going. And was that the surprise? Like once you got it going, then it's like HR, and then it's all this, or are there other surprises? Would you say that's a surprising thing?
I think it is a surprise. I think the majority of people that I know that are nonprofit EDs sort of fell into that position by, fate or whatever, and that really, I think the first 6 months when I started, I was meeting with a consultant, and he said, you're running a business. A 501c3 is just a tax code, but you are the CEO of a business, and that you need to start looking at this as a business. And so a lot of folks, I don't think, come from business administration fields, and so I've had to really look at ways to develop myself professionally with that aspect. And luckily, Duke University is in our backyard, and they have a nonprofit management certificate that I've taken several classes, and that's really helped with sort of some of the business and administrative systems that have really been challenging and I don't know if it's a surprise. I knew it had to happen, but my passion was for the social justice work and delivering and being part of that change. And while I am at some level part of the change, most of my day-to-day has me really removed from that change.
Awesome. You've got the mic right now. I'm going to bring Damita on in a second. But my last question for you, just individually, is you got a bunch of, again, our next waivers are on the call right now, or they're listening to this, on their commute back home because they've downloaded this their iPods or whatever. From your experience, what were the things, maybe one or two things that have helped you succeed while you're in this? To help you succeed while you've been in this, so, in a sense of sort of advice for them to start working on this now, right? Like as they get that, what would you say?
There's been a lot. I think probably the biggest thing is building in budget and time for some executive coaching, working one-on-one with another executive because. And I heard this quote too when I first started, an executive director is the loneliest position in the planet because you have your board of directors that you have to answer to, and you have your staff, and so you have this unique position in this organization, and you have a lot of information, and a lot of it can't be shared outside with the staff. And so really finding a confidant or someone that you can talk through issues with has been really, really helpful. So executive coaching. I would also say making sure that to establish work-life balance. I'm a mother. I have 2 young children, and that's also really challenging because there is enough work to be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for sure.
Yeah.
And then finally, just supporting your staff. I have an amazing staff. They're the ones that really are the face of the organization, do the work, and so supporting them and rewarding them, I would say, has been invaluable for me as well.
Awesome. Damita Brahman, and I think Caroline, you're still on with us. I just want to do a little bit of a couple minutes, just sort of all of us kind of just unpacking this for a quick bit. Damita, you just said the phrase, executive director is the loneliest position to have. And real quick, Damita, when you hear that, does that resonate for you? Does that scare you away? Like, what's your reaction to that statement that the executive director is the loneliest position to have?
Well, I think definitely the way that you describe it, I can see. I can definitely understand and appreciate that perspective, but it's something. It doesn't necessarily scare me away. I mean, it's definitely something to know and to to be aware of as I move into that role. But it's just good to be able to have those conversations and hear someone in the position say something like that.
Yeah, and Caroline, what is the role of networks in abating that loneliness? Is there a role for networks to abate that loneliness?
Absolutely, I think. That Bronwyn's point was so well taken that it feels like the world is on your shoulder, right? You're ultimately responsible for this organization and everyone in it, and so opening that up and having those folks that that you can go to and bring these issues to on a regular basis, just eases that weight a little bit. And I would say, Bronwyn, do you use those, or do you think that sounds right?
Yes. Absolutely. I have, there's several support groups and networks that I'm part of with other EDs. Some are more informal, some are more formalized, but absolutely, I think networking has been huge. Also, sort of along those same lines, I've really learned that a lot of it is about relationships and who you know, and that's sort of what determines what meetings you're invited to and funding. And I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that was the way that things were, but I'm finding more and more out that is the truth, and so you sort of have to play those games.
Wow. Bronwyn and Damita, thanks so much for taking the time to visit with us on this call and sharing your quick story. I hope over the next few months we get to check back in on these stories. And again, thanks so much for taking the time to sort of give sort of this public allies angle, an alum experience as we're engaging what Caroline and the work of BMP is talking about in this Vision for Change. Thanks for doing that. Yeah, thanks for doing that. I think one quick thing I want to share is before I came back to Public Allies, I did consulting. I'm an executive coach, a life coach, and when you're a consultant, right, you're always gigging, you're always finding an angle. And I come up with this idea when I was living in Texas to support executive directors in these circles of coaching. And I remember I was pitching this idea around, and I remember I kept getting feedback that it was so hard to get executive directors to be vulnerable to each other in a space because they're all competing for stuff, right? Like if I show this problem, how do I know it's not going to be used against me later? And I think that's when you guys are talking about support, I mean for me anyways, that makes it so crucial and important why hopefully the Pipeline Project can be that space where you can find other like-minded people and people who know this experience, people who have these values of public allies to be there. And so, my hope people do feel vulnerable, at least in our virtual space, and start building this up, building this network up. So Caroline, I want to, we've got about several minutes left, so I want to turn it back to you to see how do you want to wrap this one piece up before we move to next steps.
Sure. We tried, with our expert technology to put in this last poll just to get a sense of some. I think it worked, except I missed one before. But so take a look at this poll, and of the issues the speakers just brought up, and given all we've talked about, which of the issues do you most grapple with that they brought up? And if you just put it into this poll.
Great. And as people are doing this poll, can you respond to Hannah's question, Caroline?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Hannah asked if in our report we found gender and race also influence our own leadership styles. And I think if we had asked about that more in depth, we would have found that it does, because there is a lot of research out there that shows how you approach leadership does have very much to do with race and gender, but it also has to do with a lot of other things as well, socioeconomic class, background, all of this. But I think one of the most intriguing things I see going on right now is everything in the news around Sheryl Sandberg's new book and the CEO at Yahoo, and balancing family and life, and whether women have an approach to leadership that's different than men. And I just think it's a fascinating discussion to have at this time, because it certainly does influence it, but how you see that plays out in different ways.
Awesome. We see another question from Antonio, where it's how does the supervisor, executive director balance employee morale? I think that's the question. Yeah, that might be a lot to handle in 2 minutes. So I just want to acknowledge that we saw it. But I want to kind of move to wrapping up our call. But I want to let Antonio know we saw this question. I hope this is a question we're going to continue to explore. I want to also show that what
one thing to say about that, Mac.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which came
go
up
ahead.
just as short. So this isn't the whole answer, Antonio, but
yeah.
One of the challenges that folks had was that I mentioned before was around inheriting staff, right? So whenever change comes around, people had a really hard time figuring out how to handle the morale. And most of the leaders we spoke to, about half had felt that they had figured it out. And when they figured it out, it really was about getting to this vision piece, right? Like building a vision for the new future and having people be involved. The trick is not negating all that has happened before. So that's not a full answer, and I think I'm looking forward to the LinkedIn page to really get into some of these issues, but it's a start.
Awesome. Just want to, again, people seem psyched to kind of pick this up, so I want to talk about what's coming up next, because we're almost at the end of our time together. But I want to acknowledge, it seems like a big interest, again, is this gaining management experience with the dominance of the next waivers on this call right now. That sounds like, how do they gain this management experience to Damita's point, to feel this sense of like readiness to be, to where Bronwyn's talk about is balancing, all these different nuances of making impact, keeping the lights on, and then, balancing self with their own sort of pursuits, being family or the home. And hopefully you're going to keep submitting. If you haven't submitted questions yet, feel free to. We're going to revisit them on our page. I want to take time to talk about what's coming next. Over the course of the next several months, we want to keep continuing reflection. You filled out that, hopefully if you haven't done that yet, we'll repost that SurveyMonkey where you can build that map out for yourself. If you've already done it, look for the next few days. We're going to actually send back your results. We're going to send back the summary of what you completed, so that way you can revisit this conversation. So we invite you to do continued reflection. We also want to keep building community. We're going to keep building LinkedIn activities. We're going to keep posting more jobs. We're also going to have more links to learning resources. And we're going to try to do more activities that invite you to sort of maybe follow that one part of your map. Maybe you might identify activities if you're working on this part of your map and do this exercise. So stay tuned for that. And again, the LinkedIn portals, we're going to house all this stuff. And then continued convening. We're going to do convening with our cohort. We want to do Google Hangouts with a champion. So we're going to identify a champion to speak on a specific topic, and we'll invite you to talk more specifically on that topic. Today was much more general, but maybe if there's specific, we're going to line up sort of the assets and gifts and expertises of our different champions to speak to, because it's like a Swiss Army knife, if you will, collectively of giftedness in this. We also want to encourage local meetups in May and June. We've got having our money in our budget to help folks, to sort of support people having coffee together to talk about these issues. So stay tuned for that in May and June. Like, we'll actually subsidize that. We'll pay for lunch for you guys to get together. And then we're also bringing in special guests. It was also so great to have Caroline McAndrews, but we're going to bring in future webinars. We'll bring in friends from us from the independent sectors looking at this issue. So they've created a whole bunch of programming. One of them is the NGen Fellowship Program. These are under 40 leaders. I was one of them in the class of 2010. I'm going to bring some of my my colleagues from that who are doing some great stuff to share their insights and share some really cool tools around building that network. And we've got this really exciting tool that's a peer coaching tool we'll introduce in a webinar coming up that we want to share with you. Also, one of my good friends, Kevin Flynn, who I've met through Networks, is the Vice President at Common Good Careers of Recruitment. I'd love to have him, and what he's an executive headhunter for not-for-profits. His job is all about putting people in those positions, so it'll be fun to have him talk about what's it like from his angle making that connection. And he's a good guy to know, as Caroline knows, he's a buddy of ours. And then sort of down the road, if this is a very interesting topic to you and you want to take leadership on it, we have resources, money, to bring 4 next waivers and 4 champions to the Public Allies National Leadership Institute in early August to actually help us build the next wave, the next part of this pipeline. So that's part of the Annie Casey grant, right? Not only just doing this activities, but also inviting, supporting our alumni to keep building this out for the more alumni that are coming along. So stay tuned for that. If this topic is interesting to you and you're fascinated by it and you want to continue to provide leadership on this, it would be great to have you join us for that. So stay tuned for that. So that's what's coming up next. If you love what Caroline's talking about, she welcomes your feedback at cmcandrews@damis.org, as well as I invite your feedback of how this is going for you at MacArthur@publicallies.org, or look at us at the portal. And again, thanks so much for those that are pumping questions in the chat. We're definitely going to revisit those, at the portal, because I think there's some interesting pieces for this. And Caroline, I didn't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add before we take off.
No, that's it. We're at time, but thank you, everyone. It's been great looking at all the questions on LinkedIn. I look forward to more.
Awesome. Thanks so much again to Caroline McAndrews for helping us, for creating this tool for us from a report. And we look forward to sharing back with you what we've learned about ourselves through this tool. And we're excited to have this being part of this toolbox. Thanks to Caitlin Endyke, also Building Movement, for being our producer on the ones and the twos, making sure that the questions got through smoothly and people heard it. And thanks to, there was over 50 of you that had checked in at some point during this call. It's great to have you on. And thanks again to Damita Chambers and Bronwyn Lucas for being our voices of this pipeline. Stay tuned for more activities. We'll keep it coming. But until then, I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday.
Just real quick before we sign off.
All right. Before we sign off.
Posted.
Yes. We're going to post this PowerPoint online, and we have the recording, right? We got the recording of this. We'll post on LinkedIn as well. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for being on the call.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Please stand by.